Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. On this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, politics, sport, and anything else worth talking about. Now, today's guest is a writer who's written a fantastic new book called about Amelia Earhart and her husband, George Putman, about the relationship in that regard. And she's also done documentary filmmaking as well. Her name is Laurie Gwen Shapiro, and she's here to talk to me now. Hello, Laurie.
Hello, I'm so excited. I'm excited to connect across the pond. I just actually got back from a very short trip to London, and I miss the UK already.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you on here. I'm really happy to have you on.
Right.
Before we continue, talk about more about the book, just a little bit about yourself. For those who don't know who you are, can you just do a little introduction in regards to who you are? Because I know you used to do documentary filmmaking before, and now you've transitioned to like writing nonfiction. Just the journey from that to now to nonfiction, and also why you decided to write your latest book.
Sure. Well, by way of background, you're reaching me in New York City. I'm a native New Yorker. I'm so native I don't even know how to drive. It's that native. Um, but I have had a very unusual career, which I think makes is a very good path for anyone who wants to be a writer or creative. When you leave college, or even if you don't go to college, just don't judge yourself if you want to be a creative against other people's paths. Let them do that path, because creatives, by all my friends that were a little bit messy when they were in their teens and 20s, those are the most interesting people. I'm in my 50s, and I find the people that were doing that, like, I got this happening at 21 and this happening, like they're all kind of burnt out now, and my creative people are blooming. So this is my background. I started out in I always wanted to be a writer. My mentor in high school was a man called Frank McCourt, who wrote a book called Angela's Ashes, who was in that he was an incredible teacher. He got famous after he retired, but he was just to have Frank McCourt, who I'm sure many of the listeners know who that was, as your teacher. It was just at 14. I mean, it was like the greatest break from the universe ever. And he used to tell me, "I have very bad news for you. You're a writer." And everybody in this particular high school was math and science oriented. But he also gave me a warning, which comes into play later, that I had natural ability, but that is not always the best thing, because you can just get by on your just basic ability. You can coast on that. And to get to the level that you really want to get to eventually, you really have to push. So like for example, think of someone who can sing well. You could just go into a bar and start singing, but to be a professional singer, you have to really work, you have to practice, you have to push yourself past your skill set. But because of that natural ability, I published very early. I was funny. I mean, that's a very unfunny thing to say, that you're funny, but I was funny. And I could tell a story, and I wrote a book called The Unexpected Salami in 1998 when I was in my 20s. And Anthony Bourdain, the famous, food host, reviewed it. He was on Not Famous, and I had a film deal the next day, which never manifested, but I got that option money. I just cashed that check. I don't worry about like if it gets made or not. Um, but then I got pushed into a genre of writing that was called at that time chick lit, which is like Bridget Jones' Diary. The male equivalent of that was Nick Hornby. I'm using British names for
Yeah,
any British
yeah.
listeners, but it was like it was almost like like a place that young girls could make money, but they had candy colored covers, and it just really, like, I could do it. I did a couple of books, but actually they did pretty well. They weren't like extraordinary successes like Bridget Jones' Diary, but I learned how to write dialogue, and it actually serviced me well later on. Then concurrently, I started to get into documentaries, ironically, because of Frank McCourt, who helped invited me on some HBO documentaries, and I got to go to Ireland with Frank McCourt and his family, and his nephew was directing it. And then I ended up making my own documentaries. My first one with my brother, David. We went to New Guinea and the Amazon. This was a film called Keep the River on Your Right, which was a big international hit documentary wise, which is not the same as Hollywood wise.
Okay, yeah.
We would made a lot of money, and then because we had our names on the credits as the director and producer, we actually had to pay people. You can't just make a project and not pay people. So we one day we had a $500,000 check, and the next day we had like $50 left in the bank when we paid everybody out. So it's like, but we got to walk the red carpet, and then I had to go back to a temp job. Like it's like that's the reality of being a creative. But if you want to be in control of your own projects, that's what it looks like. But later on, I'm aging and I don't want to do these funny, cutesy novels. I have a father, my mother dies, my father is handicapped. He's all there, so he moves in with my family. I want to be able to do stuff and still be a caregiver, which is part of growing up. I mean, people don't talk about it, but a lot of my friends in their 50s and 60s and even in their 40s are finding this ability to have to be a caregiver as well as making a living. In our case, I'm married to an Australian ex-rocker, and we have a daughter who's now 23. But I had an older father in his 90s in my house, as well as a teenager in her peak teenage,
Mm,
which we'll leave that there. And so it's a really thing. But writing a book seemed to be a solution. And I had the skill set. This is what I teach also at NYU. I teach journalism there. I teach how to write features. And I have a lot of I teach on Zoom. I have students all over the world, even from England. And they're usually between 23 and 60. And I tell people that if they're older, you don't be worried if you didn't write a book when you're 28 or 29. You take all parts of your life and they become useful, especially if you're creative. And in my case, I knew how to write dialogue. I knew how to do characters and plots and scenes. I knew how to tell a story cinematically. And that is what is exactly a genre of literary writing called narrative nonfiction. Many of you may have heard of David Gran and Killers of the Flower Moon and The Wager, or Patrick Radden Keefe, Say Nothing. These have been made into series, or Eric Larson. These are narrative nonfiction writers. Now, there's not a lot of women doing this. And I saw an in because people wanted me to keep writing at chick lit. It's not that I couldn't get book deals. I could get a book, but I was in my lane. They're like, keep in your lane. And I wanted to break out. And I realized that it was my combination of my background, of my cinematic storytelling skills and my dialogue and novelistic skills, that I could do narrative nonfiction. And I did a book in 2019 called The Stowaway, which was a narrative nonfiction book about it stars a teenager, but it was for adults, about a boy who jumps in the Hudson River in New York and stows away to Antarctica in 1928. I actually went to I got a book deal, even though I had to switch agents because my agent didn't think I could do that. And when somebody doesn't believe what you believe in, you just get the F out.
yeah, yeah.
I got someone who believed in me. I sold a book in 6 weeks
Oh,
after being told that I couldn't do it. And the beauty of nonfiction, and if anyone's listening, is that you get paid to write the book. With a novel, you have to write the whole book and sell it. But with the narrative nonfiction, you write a proposal and maybe a chapter or two. And I got a lot of money. I mean, for me, much more than a chick lit book to go to. I could do things like go to Antarctica and really research it. And that put me on the map. In like I'm gonna out myself as a 59-year-old person right now. This happens at mid-century. I mean, this is like the journey of a creative. It's not that I wasn't doing things my whole life. It's just that I feel like I'm really finally doing what feels right to me, what I'm a naturally great at is nonfiction, history, digging, and storytelling. And I'm getting paid for it now. So when the Stowaway did reasonably well, I even got to go to England, by the way. I got to talk at Cambridge at the Scott Polar Center. That was really exciting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
And I then knew that I wanted to do another book like this, and I will tell you that in the Stowaway, which takes place in the late 20s, the rock stars of the late 20s was not the flapper crowd, not F. Scott Fitzgerald. That had actually faded. It was the Aviators. It was Admiral Byrd in America, Charles Lindbergh, of course,
Yeah.
and Amelia Earhart, and they were all published by one man, George Palmer Putnam. And
Mm,
that was how I got into this Amelia Earhart story. I was actually, because of my Antarctica book, I realized that George Putnam was publishing Amelia Earhart, who's flying her plane over the ship with the stowaway. So there's sort of a connect right there. And then as I was digging a little bit on that book, I realized that George Putnam was having an affair with Amelia Earhart at that moment. And I was
mm.
like, oh my God, that wasn't in my little kid's biography book. That's kind of hot or horrifying, however your morals are. And I just thought, I'm going to dig a little longer, but I filed that away. And when I was looking for another story, I realized that um, there's been plenty of books about Amelia Earhart. Most of them now focus on how she disappeared. And I realized I didn't even know if she was a good person. Like Charles Lindbergh was a secret Nazi, right? That
Yeah.
comes out later. Um, was she a good pilot? I didn't even know she was married. She married George Putnam later. He left his wife for her, who and so I didn't know if that was a real marriage. Some people said, she's lesbian or I didn't know. Like, I wouldn't care, by the way.
Yeah.
Sexuality, gender, I don't really care. I just am a journalist. I just wanted the truth. And I started from a place of curiosity, like it's not how did Amelia Earhart die? It was who was Amelia Earhart? Who was she? I don't want this like whitewash narrative. I want people a flawed person. I mean, she was in many books, she's a great pilot. She's perfect. I mean, there was something that seemed a little bit off. Not to say that she's a bad person, but I wanted a real fleshed out narrative for adults, not an Amelia Earhart book for kids.
Cool. So before we get on to who Amelia Earhart was and who George Putnam was, because he's sometimes left out of the background, and in terms of publishing, he did a lot of things which are still used today. But we'll get to that in a minute. You said there in your last answer, you talked about narrative nonfiction and how there wasn't a lot of women doing it. Why do you think that is?
I think that first, there's a lot of reasons. This is complicated, but a lot of the great advances go to men, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I learned this very young in chick. I mean, I would write a book called Chick Lit, and I get a certain amount of money. I mean, maybe it's in America, so the British people are going to be shocked that Americans get a lot more money for books because there's more people. But like, I thought it was a little bit of money. It was like 25,000, 50,000. But it was good for a kid, like like a young woman, right? But men like would be writing a book and they would get 500,000 or 1 million. It was crazy. Like, why are you know? And then through documentary making and also working with HBO, I realized that um they didn't really care who directed the film. I'm going to be really honest with you. Like, that's a misnomer. What they really want on like a documentary is access to the story. And if you can provide that, they'll slap anyone on as a director. You guys can war it out behind the scenes. We just want to have something that no one else has. But if you as a writer can provide access, your value goes up. So with The Stowaway, my last book, I found the wife of this kid. Nobody was trying to write about the stowaway, but I mean, nobody had the story. I had the story, so they're going to pay me for it. With Amelia Earhart, a lot of people have done Amelia Earhart. So in order to get that sort of value, I had to find something different, something new. And it's not that I just wrote the book of proposal and sold it. I did pre-research. I mean, I mentioned to you before that I was in England um a few weeks 2 weeks ago, because not because I'm doing Amelia Earhart stuff there. I was doing some pre-research on a possible book project. So you do a proposal after a couple of months of like dipping your toes. Um, I found out that there was a lot of the Amelia Earhart story that had been kind of cut out because of descendants or other people. And I found out there were archives that people hadn't looked at. And that's just amazing. Like you put that in your proposal. And what people then start paying you for is access. And even a woman at this point, it doesn't matter what your sex is or anything, because you just now they're paying for your access, right? So now you're level the playing field. And I tell this to women writers as well. And I've seen friends get, and I'll tell you, narrative nonfiction pays really well. In America, British people sit down, but like you can get advances of like $250,000 to over $1 million on a good narrative nonfiction book. Whereas, if you're doing like a literary novel or, a memoir, you can get that kind of money, but it's like, to under 100,000 usually. So I realize that women don't know this. And I tell people often one thing that they can do is take a story that was told dryly, because narrative nonfiction is a somewhat new genre, believe it or not. In the 90s, even people were telling very what they call cradle to grave biographies. So you get say you have Albert Einstein, you have his birth, his childhood, his high school, but a narrative nonfiction is looking for the story, like almost like a movie. Like,
Yeah.
what is the movie that you would tell? So the Amelia Earhart story that I realized is that it's not, even though she was a Midwestern girl born in Kansas, and then she eventually moves to New York, the story doesn't really begin in Kansas. Like that could be part of a flashback. The story meets when begins really when she's being almost in the first reality show, being cast as the first woman that's going to go across the Atlantic. There's a whole contest who's going to be first. Putnam is looking for someone with some backing because he's published Lindbergh and he made a fortune on that book. And the only motivation for him is, I want the book by the first woman across, because nobody cares about any guy going across the Atlantic anymore. That's been done. It's Charles Lindbergh. What's new? What's fresh? It's publishing. Just like I'm saying, I need a fresh story. And that's how he meets Amelia Earhart. And they first meet when she's right across the desk from him. And he's married, and he's in a dead marriage. He's married to a very rich woman who is the Crayola crayon heiress. So this is jazz age. And
Mm.
so he's besotted with her. So not only does he want to like promote her, but he wants to have sex with her. Let's just cut to the chase there. So this is much more interesting than like a dry beginning where, a girl is walking through a field in Kansas. She looks up at the sky and maybe she sees the stars, and oh, maybe one day I'm gonna fly. That's a 1980s narrative. 2025, it's like we want a story, we want depth, we want characters. And in order to tell the story, you have to do the exact same research that a really good biographer does. You have to hit the archives, you have to interview people. One of the things that I say from documentary making, a lot of writers just try to look on Google online. You need a sense of place. That's why when I worked on documentaries, I went to New Guinea, I went to the Amazon, I went all over the world to get scenes. But when you're doing a cinematic book on the page, you also want to have a sense of place. So in the Amelia Earhart story, there's a lot that takes place in Newfoundland, which was not part of Canada in the 20s. It was his own country. I went to Newfoundland for a week. I went to the towns that she was leaving before she was famous to fly across the Atlantic. I went all over the country of my country, not your country, to
Mm.
find archives that had not been tapped. I spent 5 years on this book. So it's it's a long book, but I also wanted it to be a definitive book about Amelia Earhart, an actual story, not a narrative where, Amelia is perfect. Now she's not horrifying, but she's not the greatest flyer in the world. She's not a terrible flyer, but
Yeah.
she's also, she's flawed. And George is very flawed. He's what we might call a grandiose narcissist in 2025. I don't think people were running around saying that in the jazz age. But
Yeah.
he's terrifying and he's squashing. There's a woman from Ireland named Lady Heath, who I believe is living in England, and that was one of the great flyers. And Amelia Earhart's manager, George Putnam, who becomes her husband, is trying to quash anyone in the world that might rival her attention because, in addition to everything else, and we can get to this, it starts in the jazz age, but the book quickly enters um, the Great Depression. And I actually don't know how much the Great Depression hit the UK. Do you know?
I don't, to be honest. It's weird because there's not really that much said on it as such, really. Um,
Yeah. It hit
one,
America hard for 10 years. And from
yeah,
1929 to basically to World War II.
yeah. I mean, they that period, they end up talking a little bit more about Germany more because obviously they were bankrupt in the First World War, and then they had to pay off a lot of stuff, and that led to Hitler and whatnot. So they talk about that more than anything else. But in terms of how it affected the UK, that recession, there's not really a lot of word. I imagine a lot of people might have lost, especially if you're a very successful businessman from the UK and you put, I don't know, shares in like the New York stock market as international. So you would have been affected in that sense. But there's not, when you talk about Great Depression, we do tend to associate it more over this side with America rather than the UK.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, and the Great Depression here is a I mean, it's hard to say that a concept is part of a character in a book, but it really is. Like, they are broke. They had money in the jazz age, like many people. They are dead broke. Famous people are dead broke. Famous people in America are jumping out of roofs, committing suicide. I mean, it's like people lost millions overnight in October of 1929. And the Great Depression gets worse. It really gets bad around 1933. And what George Putnam has, he's kicked out of his family firm, which is still going, but there's no Putnams there, called Putnam Books. It's famous. I mean, they had British side as well. His wife is moved on to another person. She's the one that had the money. Even though he was in publishing, she had the money. Everybody was still using crayons in the Great Depression, and he's got nothing. And what he does have is an affair with Amelia Earhart, and she's had been making money, and she's lost all her money. Her father dies. He was an alcoholic. He has no money, and basically they have each other. So it starts out as a real romantic sexual relationship, by the way, but it quickly turns into a partnership. And many people will think about the pandemic or great recessions. How do you survive with your partner? You got to get through it. And Amelia and George decided they're going to get through the Great Depression. And in addition to all this, if for anyone who's interested in storytelling, and I know you are, Chris,
Yeah.
um, another character in the book, beyond all these people that I'm mentioning, is are locations. So New York is a character,
Yeah.
Kansas is a character. I mean, where is your book set? What time is it in? Like, so for example, I was in Antarctica because even though there's not much changed in terms of what it looks like, I wanted to feel feel Antarctica. I wanted to see details that, I couldn't just Google. I always tell people when was working about a book about Antarctica that I got there and I didn't realize that all the different penguins that you see are not in the same place. So you see these tiny little Adelie penguins in one area, but as you get further closer to the South Pole, you see the giant empire penguins at like from Happy Feet, and they're
Yeah.
not in the same place. Those penguins will never meet. And also, where you go to the penguins, it smells like a cow barn. Like
Oh,
that's something I would not have. I mean, like you could put like the senses in your book. And also, I my original draft was all white, everything, and then you realize it's like there's different colors, there's sunlight, there's blood, I mean, there's just all sorts of things you can go. Likewise, when you travel for with the Amelia Earhart book, I was able to understand the fog of being trapped on Newfoundland. She couldn't actually go across on her first trip for 2 weeks, and she was stuck in a small town. And I went to the same town, and I actually had dinner with the descendants of the people that hosted her in 1928, and
oh wow.
they brought out a scrapbook. I mean, no one, if you go there, people bring out things like, oh, here's when Amelia was here. I was like, what? I mean, you have to get off of the couch. I'm sitting on the couch telling you this, but I that's the biggest problem I find with my youngest students at NYU, many who are like 23, 24. My daughter is 23. They grew up in the pandemic and we're doing a Zoom conversation, but they don't know that, just calling someone on the phone is not research. You got to go out the door, maybe get past your comfort zone and go to the place. And if you don't have any money, you get on some, like, I don't know what the equivalent of Greyhound is in the UK. You get on a bus. We have even Chinatown buses that connect all the Chinatowns in America, and they're like really cheap. They're like $13 to go across. Just get on that. Couch surf. Whatever you have to do, get to, put on social media, I am going to this location. Can anyone host me on the couch? I just need to be there for a day. Go to the places because that is going to open up doors. Whether you're writing in fiction or you're doing nonfiction, you've got to have a sense of place. And when you go places, you meet people and you have much more depth to your story.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I spoke to interview Candice Millard on this podcast a while ago, and
Uh-huh.
she said something similar because her last book was on the Nile, and she actually went to the Nile. She'd done a book on Churchill, and she actually went to Africa where she was talking about Churchill. She's done exactly the same as you have, and I've
She's
spoken.
my idol, by the way. She is, when I was mentioning names, she actually blurbed my book. I almost fainted, by the way. She's
uh,
amazing. And her footnotes are amazing. Like at the end, you just like it's like don't just read her book, go to the end and read the notes. You'll be amazed. But she once said, I went to a lecture. I mean, just like people might be listening to me for inspiration, I go often to author lectures and listen to podcasts, whatever. But I went to a lecture she was giving, and she was saying if you're doing a big narrative nonfiction book and it comes in under 4 years, she doesn't quite trust the book. And I
yeah,
get that completely because this is not for the weak. I mean, you do get a lot of money if you got a good topic, but that money you go through that money if you're doing your job. You use that money to travel. You don't just like, go out and buy sushi, right? It costs money to travel. And also you're getting paid as an author in chunks. So you're not getting a monthly salary. You're not getting paid every year. So you might get this big chunk of money and that's got to last for 2 or 3 years, right?
mhm.
Then you get another chunk of money when I actually should be getting chunk of money in 2 days. Because you get another chunk of money when the book comes out. My pub date is July 15th. And it's also coming out as an audio book. I don't know if anyone in England, I mean, everyone's heard of The Man from Uncle, but there was
Yeah,
a short-lived show called The Girl from Uncle, which was starring Stephanie Powers, and then there was a television show called Heart to Heart, which was a big
yeah,
American
Pacific
show.
Islands with Robert Wagner in
Stephanie
it.
Powers is my audiobook narrator. I'm just so excited about this.
Oh gosh,
Right.
yeah.
And she also was a pilot. So here's the thing. someone reached out to me and said, "I have this crazy idea. Would you like Stephanie Powers?" And I was like, "Well, I'll introduce her to Penguin Random House." And they said yes. So, like, reach out. I mean, Chris, you reached out to me and I don't know you, but I was like, "Sure." Like, go out of your comfort zone, ask people. The worst thing that you can happen is get a no. That's
Mhm.
it. So
Yeah,
you move on to the next person, right?
indeed, absolutely. And that's one thing I have learned about this podcast is just go, like I say, go out your comfort zone, interview people who, yes, you might be interested in the stories, but you might never have even attempted to do so like a while ago. And it's interesting you talk about research because there's one idea which for a book which I had to stop in the end, looking to come back into it. And one, even though it's based on someone British, it would involve court documents from New York, ironically enough.
Uh-huh.
So then in my head, I'm thinking, okay, do they keep court documents from like 1950s, and if they do so or not? And I was going to reach out to writers, and if they did, then go over there myself, and so on and so forth. So
Right. It's a
yeah,
must.
yeah,
And it costs money, but you gotta figure it out. I mean,
yeah.
like when I was 21, I have an Australian husband because I traveled. I always wanted to go to Australia. I got a job. I had some shitty job in Australia, like illegal. Like I was like cash only, but I did it. It was my dream to go to Australia. I wanted an Australian rock. I was into Australian rock back then. That was the 80s and late 80s. And I met an Australian rocker. I brought him back, like I dragged him back like a cave woman. But I manifest. It's not that I got lucky. I tell everyone, make your own luck. You have to be your absolute number one champion. No matter how much the only person that probably loved me in the way that I need someone to just completely obsess on me was my mom. She's no longer here. Your mom always, like not everybody, but a lot of people have a mother that my father loved me and but he was like, he was like, "Oh, you sold your book. That's wonderful." You know. And my husband is delightful, but like, he's not a writer. It's the person that has to be your best friend at all times is you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you have to do it. And no one's going to say, "You know what? You're going to have to scramble together to figure out a way to get across, the Atlantic and do this and do this." You just do it. You just like ask, like, "Can anyone host me? Can anyone help me?" I mean, I have a young woman that I mentored, who's a daughter of a friend who didn't have any money at all, coming from a very unprivileged background. And we made that a GoFundMe so that she could travel to Africa and all over the place, and she really wanted to do some research in Africa, and she got money from people, and she got enough money to go there, and now she has a good career going
Mm.
because that was her workaround. Like, all right, let's just ask, and people, by the way, love to help.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
asking for $20, it's a lot different than you're asking somebody for $20,000.
yeah, yeah,
If
yeah.
you have 100 friends, suddenly you have enough money to get a plane ticket.
Oh yeah, indeed, indeed. No, I completely agree with you on that. And I always say to people, not just in writing but in life, just try and do things because if you get to a certain age and you haven't tried it, but it's always been in the back of your head, you'll regret not trying it in the first place. So I always say to people, it's how I've developed as a person. Just get out your comfort zone and just try
Right.
things and do things like.
There is another hard, fast rule, which is don't be, um, I was gonna say asshole, I have to say arsehole, right? Oh, you really can't be because that will catch up with you. I know people who are super talented, will do anything, but their reputation precedes them. And people talk, no matter what world you're in, whether you're in the boxing world, whether you're in the screenwriting world, once you start getting into a certain section, the world shrinks and
Mhm.
people talk. So if you treat someone terribly, if you even like I've seen directors scream at interns who are just kids and volunteering. And I'm a mom, and I'm like, get the F out of here with that. And I tell people, like, that person just screamed at a kid for like getting the wrong cup of coffee or something. You don't do that. Like, this isn't 1945, and like, you gotta treat people well. And
Yeah.
also, if you're asking for a favor, like, if you're asking if you ask like a celebrity, and that's not me, but if you're asking, like, I have had some celebrity blurbs, right? If do them a favor too, like if they have a book out, put it on your social media, put it on your Instagram, tag them, say, I just read this book. It's really wonderful. I mean, in my case, the most well-known person who's really been really helpful, gave me the cover blurb for my book is David Gran, who wrote The Wager and Killers of the Flower Moon, and he's number one author in the United States. And you know what? It doesn't hurt when he has a book coming out to go to his event, sit in the front, ask a question, put something on on online, because writers and filmmakers are not rock musicians. No matter how well known they are, they're still not rock musicians, and
Yeah,
they love it. They love for you to help, and it does help. And so, be give back and also open doors. I try to do that all the time. Like, so I had my book. I was very, very lucky to get my book. It was recently, about 4 weeks ago, excerpted in the New Yorker, which was very unusual and it was very viral. It's driving some book sales. Um, but immediately some people call me and say, "Hi, I just Facebook friended you. Can you give me your editor to the New Yorker?" Now that's not good networking. That's
yeah,
a-holery, right? But if someone's your friend and good and kind, and they reach out and they're asking, "Can you open a door? Do you know anyone that's an editor at this magazine that's not the New Yorker? Like,
yeah,
can you have coffee with me?" Never say pick your brains. That's like, that drives everybody crazy.
yeah,
But, open doors. I get a lot of people who are in their just graduated from college and journalism, or writers, and they want to have coffee with me. And I usually say yes if I have the time, because, I love coffee. As I've said before the broadcast began, I
yeah,
always go for a cup of coffee. But you know what? People did that for me when I was younger. And I try also to realize my privilege at all times. I am in New York. I did go to school in New York City, and that, I have more connections and people that might be growing up in more remote places. I try to be, I don't care what someone's race or sexuality or a gender identity. I don't care. It's just, are you a good person? Are you a good storyteller? Are you reaching out with respect? If I can hook you up, I will. Like, so it's like that is, but people did it for me, and you got to pay it forward and not expect anything. You just hope that you're a good person. And I think some of the attention that I've gotten is definitely, I'm going on a big book tour for about 4 months. In a few days, I'm going to be leaving my house forever. And my poor cat, my kitty cat, doesn't know what's coming. Fortunately, I have my daughter and my husband here, so she's not going to be left alone. But I'm very attached to a cat. She's my baby. But you know what? A lot of the events that have been set up around the United States in particular, and then there's one happening in Toronto as well, are friends,
mhm,
that I've been, or even Facebook friends or Instagram friends that I've been kind to. People want to help. It's not all coming from my publisher. Just don't be an a-hole. However you say it, with whatever accent.
yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And like I said, this podcast has learned a lot of lessons in that regard. Just reaching out to people like I did with yourself, asking for interviews. There's even a couple of writers, I won't say their names, but both of them have released books. And I said to them at the end, because we talked off air about me writing screenplays, and I said to these two authors, well, obviously, I've not got the money to buy the rights to your books, but I think they'd be very good in terms of a script. So, would you mind if I use those as like practice material in terms of adapting from book to film? Now, technically, because I'm only doing that and I'm not going to send a script to anyone else, so just practice, I could have easily just said, nah, I'll just do it behind their backs. But I had so much respect for them that I wanted to do that with knowing them, and they both got back to me and said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So that could be a practice. Who knows? Maybe it could lead to somewhere, even if it's just a
Sure.
template. But it's that sort of thing where you can do that. So I completely agree with you on everything you said with regards to writing and don't be an idiot, basically, on that regard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and sometimes if somebody doesn't know, like that's the other thing. Sometimes people don't know the social, like I get a lot of connections with people who are on the spectrum or have, learning disability. And I know, and it's like, you don't judge them to the same standard. They might be incredibly gifted and might have some awkward social skills. And, I'm sure that my father was a genius. He was a scientist. I'm sure he had the social skills of Attila the Hun, you know. My mother was a social genius, but back in the day, I'm sure Einstein was on the spectrum, right? Back in the day, you had a wife, or yeah, like it's like no, people were called geniuses, but I recognize that. I tell my students if they have OCD, if they have ADD, that's great for journalism because you get to change your topic all the time. OCD, you can hyper focus and really get obsessive about something, and you need to do that. So you got to be also, if you're working on a material, whether it's a screenplay or a nonfiction book or even a novel, you've got to be in love with the material. Like you're going to be living with it for a long time. So maybe if it's something you're just kind of interested in, try writing an article or a short story. Like don't, but if you're going to take on a big project like this, you better like what you're writing because it's going to take a while. But I get bored even while I'm working. For 5 years, I want some instant gratification, and I'll write articles. So I write lost history stories is my specialty. I try to bring them to life in a narrative way. And I've written a lot for the New York Times and the New Yorker. And this all, by the way, anyone listening, this all started after the age of 50. Remember, I used to write fiction and documentary. So this is a new. And one day I started to get some success. I'm not on the staff of these publications, but I would get what they called the Great Read for the Times. One day I got an email inviting me to be the features professor at New York University's journalism school, which is one of the two famous journals. I thought I was being punked. And it was just I really did. I was like, okay, who's playing with me? And then it turned out they really wanted me to be a professor because I'm a storyteller, because I'm not like caught up in academia. I'm an adjunct professor, by the way. I'm not a tenured, but that's what I want to be. I only teach one class a year, and that's changed me, by the way. I never ever wanted to be a teacher. That was never in my career plan, but I'm a say yes person. I said yes to this podcast, and it's a delightful conversation. I said yes to this professorialship, which is just one class a year, and it's changed my life because suddenly I'm teaching. I'm giving to the next Frank. A lot of my skill set comes from watching Frank McCourt teach. I think I had the best teacher in the world. And I try to teach the way Frank McCourt teach, which is out of the box, by the way. He didn't have this crazy straight curriculum. He listened to his students. He pushed me. I told you I had an older father in high school. He made me write about my father's disability, and he was in a wheelchair, and I didn't want to write about that. I wanted to write some funny hip thing, and he made me write it, and it was the best writing I did in high school, and I burst into tears, and the whole class stood up and started to cheer. This is true. It was covered in the 90s for Reader's Digest. And
Okay.
I hated him for making me do that, but like he really pushed me. Like take the pain, and even comedy can come from pain, but
Yeah, yeah.
put your pain into your work, Angela's Ashes is painful. Read about his poverty, his life in poverty in Ireland, but it's funny. I mean, the movie wasn't so funny. I felt like the Scott Rudin movie just missed the whole story of it because Angela's Ashes is really funny and it's a somber movie. I was like, yeah, Frank's dead, but I think he felt the same way. But I think the thing is that his comedy came from pain.
Yeah,
lived experience.
yeah, indeed, very much so. Fantastic. Going back to Amelia Earhart, what was she like before she met Putnam? Because all I've read about her, she seemed to be someone who was, and I don't like to quite such, but it's the only way I can think. It's almost like a modern woman in the sense that she was more carefree. She wasn't constrained by the traditionalism of what women were seen to supposed to be back in that day. She seemed to be her own figure. Would that be fair to say? And or was that?
Yeah, no, I think she was a pilot. I mean, this is not like he just created a pilot. She was what we would call a hobby pilot, the way some people might water ski on the weekends. She was very sporty. She would be Sporty Spice. I love my UK like um, but she I wasn't sure what her sexuality is. You'll have to find in the book, but like, like people she had a lot of boyfriends. I'm gonna spoil her. Um but she was kind of ambitious. She wanted to count and she fell in the years going by. So the thing with aviation, um, particularly in the UK and the US, and even in Germany, a lot of the men had the hours from World War One, right? So they could get the aviation jobs because you need a lot of hours to fly. You can't just fly. And women weren't being given aviation jobs. The only way women can make money was through stunt flying, riding on wings or doing crazy, dangerous flights. And she did a little bit of that, but then she followed a path. She had a lot of jobs. She was trying. A lot of things out. And she was trying to count. She was born in the Victorian era in 1897, and she was just a little bit older than the flapper crowd. So imagine the difference from like right before the flapper crowd. All of a sudden people wearing short skirts, like hoop skirts to like what?
Yeah,
I mean, it's sort of like the 60s was the same radical shift from the 50s. It was similar. Um, and she's trying to count, but she's finding herself in her almost 30, which doesn't sound like old to me, but it was back then. You're an unmarried woman. And she goes into social work. She's actually engaged to someone, but she's very afraid of getting married because being married meant living with your husband and supporting his goals. And she wanted to count. And she started to rise in social work. So she was still flying here and there, but she real then and social work was a place for women to rise. There's a woman named Frances Perkins who was on FDR's cabinet, the first woman on a presidential cabinet. She was a social worker. So that's really where she was rising in Boston. And when she was cast, I like to say, for a reality show, it was because she was a wholesome woman, and she was like looked all American, had waspy roots. And by the way, I want to say there were lots of people who were flying before her who were not white. I mean, Bessie Coleman is a very
yeah,
famous African American pilot who was doing incredible things well before Amelia Earhart. She died before Amelia Earhart got famous. She actually had to go to Europe because there was so much racism in the United States. That part, all of that was written out of the narrative of all the biographies. And I tried to and again, this is narrative nonfiction, which is very biographical, but I tried to put in the people that were cut out of the story in my story. So, for example, there's a lot of racism in the even the women that felt that they were discriminated against about by the men. They were a white group of women pilots called the 99s. The
yeah,
black women were not allowed into this organization. So history is not pretty.
yeah.
Jazz age, Amelia Earhart starts out in the 20s, which is the age of eugenics, as we all know.
Mm.
But here's where it gets good. She actually, she's pretty good for the 20s. I mean, everybody's into eugenics, but let's just say
Yeah,
but she meets Eleanor Roosevelt in the 30s. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt is a great person. She was a non-racist person. She was, women's champion as well. And Amelia Earhart's views on race shift, I found documented evidence. Not can't say the same for a lot of other aviators. Skewed very prejudiced views. I mean, the most famous one, of course, is Lindbergh. Did some interesting things. Horrible person. So, so it's like trying to kind of tease out the real story. And that's not always the story that people want. You don't want to have a kid's book where someone might have some racist views at the beginning of the book, or you don't want that. And but it's okay. People change. I mean, my own father was born in 1920. And when he died, he was very open-minded about gay marriage. But when he was growing up in the 30s and the 40s, they didn't believe in that, right? So it's
Yeah,
like he changed. He's one of the good ones. People
yeah,
can change.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, indeed. And
And
with
Amelia Earhart changed. That's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, oh yeah, I mean, she was what, I think 41 when she passed away, and yeah,
No,
obviously,
yeah, no, she was just about to be 40. She was about to celebrate her birthday, which is coming up. I'm actually going to the Kansas to after my New York launch on July 15th. I'm going to Amelia Earhart Festival, which draws 50,000 people, and
wow,
it's around her birthday, you know.
oh gosh, okay, yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And you talk about Charles Putnam. I read when I was doing research for his interview, I read somewhere that he was called a P.T. Barnum of publishing, and a lot of the methods he used in terms of promoting his authors we still use today. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes. I mean, I like to call him like an evil genius. But he did a lot of things you got to give him credit for. He was the master of, I mean, here's some of the scary things. Like, he kind of developed ghostwriting. Like, there people were so good, but like he would get like if somebody was doing something big, like flying across the Atlantic, he would have ghostwriters already working on it so that the second the person like got to New York, like Amelia Earhart, like her books were under her name, but she didn't write them. They were
Mhm.
ghostwritten. I mean, that's what I hear people tell me. She was a great writer. She was a terrible writer, you know. She even had a column as for Cosmopolitan, and she was not writing her own column, but he did that for everyone. He would do what is called instant books. When she crossed the Atlantic in 32 by herself, um they he added a little record on the back of his book of the British broadcasters talking about her arrival. And think about that. That's like getting a CD-ROM later on in the 90s, like that's pretty cool. That stuff is very inventive, and that's coming from George Putnam. He also would make shit up.
Yeah, yeah. He was like a publicist, so you're going to do that, or at least bend the truth, I imagine.
And people weren't fact checking. And newspapers that we think of today, they're not perfect now, but like if newspapers paid for the rights for explorers, which were Putnam's clients. So the New York Times had the right to Admiral Byrd. The New York Times had the right to Charles Lindbergh's story. Rival papers like the New York Herald Tribune, which doesn't exist anymore, would have another explorer. So you would never see a bad word said about like Charles Lindbergh in the Times because they were paying to have exclusive coverage. Now they don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
Newspapers aren't perfect, but technically, you can't pay for coverage.
yeah, indeed. It's yeah, he like I said, he was very inventive and
Yeah, and he was nasty to people that weren't powerful or crossed him, but he would kiss the ass of anyone who was powerful, and that included the New York Times editors.
oh,
And
okay.
he would fet them and drink with them. And I don't know if you know people like that are only nice to people. Like maybe they're nice to their family but they're really nice to the people that can empower them. And when, I always say you can judge a person by how they talk to a waiter,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If they treat a waiter like terrible, they're probably a terrible person. But,
Yeah.
and here's the irony, and I say that I've said this on, to some interviewers, we do not get Amelia Earhart inspiring millions of people without George Palmer Putnam. She was not going to do this stuff alone. She was not on a trajectory to change history. So we have to get this kind of awful person married to her, and he's not awful to her. He's not awful. He sometimes he is, but not most of the time. He's very nice to her. He's mean. She's his meal ticket, basically, And but he loves her, and he's very
Yeah,
nice to his kids, right? And but together, that's why the title is the marriage that, the subtitle, the marriage that made an American icon. It is together that we get this new Amelia Earhart. And I've interviewed women astronauts going to the moon, whose idol was Amelia Earhart. They're going to the moon because they were inspired by Amelia Earhart. But without George Putnam in the picture, there would be no Amelia Earhart.
yeah.
In my mind, there's two Amelia Earharts.
Dean Putnam helped, well, get Earhart to do a lot of stunts before she went out on the actual flight, which she disappeared from.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that she was doing some stunts on her own before she met him, but that kind of time that was in the early 20s. She meets him in 1928, by the way, and she dies in 1937 on July 2nd. Or July 1st, like when she disappears, she's dead. I mean, I don't care what anyone says. Don't come for me on social media. I got the receipts. And, she didn't like live on an island and get or taken by the Jap. That's all just stop. And she ran out of gas. Spoiler. She knew that she could run out of gas. She took that risk, but she did a lot of stunts. And here's the thing. Sometimes, I don't know if you remember the guy, Evil Knievel,
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
right, like, sometimes if you make it, it's great, no guts, no glory, right? But at the same time, if you don't make it, it's not so great. And other aviators were much more qualified, female aviators, and I mean, than Amelia Earhart. And they would take less risks. They would learn things like Amelia Earhart didn't learn Morse code,
yeah,
things like that. And she didn't get a lot of hours in that she needed. A lot of hours are needed to be like a lot of hours are needed to be a great writer, right? Or filmmaker. A lot of hour or musician, but a lot of hours are needed to be a great aviator. And now Putnam is using Amelia to to give lectures around the world, mostly in the United States. But she was doing over 300 lectures a year when she should be practicing her flying. But they were paying the bills. So it's like, what did people do in the Great Depression to keep going? In the case of Amelia Earhart and George Palmer Putnam, they used Amelia Earhart's name to pay bills. And she should have been flying more.
yeah, yeah, indeed. Just quickly, before we go into what happened after the flying, after she died, you said about Putnam and I think his second, his wife before Amelia, and you mentioned how his wife had all the money,
Yeah.
but didn't he come from a family of wealth?
Ah, he was what we call, I mean, I think you have this expression across the pond too. Um, uh, House rich, cash poor. Like he
Yeah,
didn't have a
yeah,
house, right? The Putnam publishing was very different. He came from G.P. Putnam and Sons, which was founded in the 1800s. They had offices in the UK and York, and they were very genteel, quiet. They published some all stars, but publishing changes in the 20th century, and they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have like the film, like it wasn't that way. It was like modest upper middle class, but they had staff. They wanted to appear rich. They had, even like middle class. I meet a lot of people that are in their 80s and 90s here, and they would have maids, but they weren't rich. They were like, that was a big thing to have a maid, even if you were middle class. It was a status thing. They had it's kind of horrifying to read now. You have to remember what time we're in. Most of these homes had a houseboy, which was usually an Asian man who's in his 40s or 50s, to be a servant, paid servant. They had to pay bills and staff, and they didn't have a lot of money. It's
yeah,
like when I hear people get big book deals, and then they got to travel around the world to write the book. or documentary makers. I always laugh at the Oscars because that's the chance that I have to. I know a lot of people, having been in the documentary world, occasionally someone gets nominated for the short documentary or even the long documentary, usually the short, and they're poor. I know how poor they are. I know that they struggle to get to the Oscars, and everyone else on stage is like a gazillionaire, and then there's the and I think that if only people knew how broke documentary makers are. You do not get rich making documentaries, but it's
Right.
great because you can get, you can make your own films basically. If you scramble, you can act. It's very difficult to make your own feature film. You really do need a like money, and but a documentary is, it's possible to make it on a shoestring budget. And sometimes, I mean, I've been nominated for awards. As I said, I won several awards. I won the Independent Spirit Award
Right.
in
Yeah.
2001, and I was in red carpet, I was in five-star hotels, and the next week I was back temping. So it's like that's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
reality of documentary making, but you do what you have to do. And I had incredible connections. I got to travel all over the world for festivals. But, I did not get wealthy off of documentaries.
Yeah, I think it was Sean Baker and another director who was nominated at last Oscars for Best Director. I think they both said that in terms of payments, they didn't get paid a lot at all for their films. I mean, Sean Baker, Honora, which I've not seen yet, I want to
Yeah,
see, that
yeah.
got paid. I can't remember how many Oscars, but he got like, a number of Oscars, like for best actress, best director, best editing, etc. And you think that he would earn a lot of money, and he didn't. He earned very little, very little, right? Because as you said earlier, other people have got to get paid because in their contracts, yeah.
Oh, the first people that get paid, by the way, the directors often don't get paid because if you, particularly if you want to be the director or the producer and you want top credit, you're going to give up your salary.
Mm,
Maybe like in England and Canada and Australia, sometimes it's built into the proposal. But in the US, we scramble. We don't even go for proposals. We're just like, we try to put it together. It's a very different mentality. In Canada, I've worked on Canadian docs, and they don't start a film until they get paid. I was like, what do you mean? We go into debt. We like, put 12 things on a credit card. We start our films. But the thing is that the editor on a documentary always gets paid. You cannot not pay your editor. And the most important thing on a film, on an indie film, whether it's a feature or a doc, is audio. You can have shitty visuals and you can't have shitty audio. You have to have good audio. So the audio gal or guy has to get paid, right? Those are the two important payments, but that costs a lot. People don't come cheap. And then you have to pay for things like insurance. People don't tell you you have to pay $25,000 of insurance. People don't tell you that you have to do Dolby sound. All these things add up. And I'm not kidding. I had a $500,000 check with my brother, and we took ourselves out for high-end sushi the next day. That's all we could do. After we paid we were like, okay, we're gonna have one big hurrah, and then we're gonna pay our bills. But the truth of the matter is it was worth it because I got to make my own stories. And now I'm older, and I'm not, I mean, I might be involved with documentaries soon. There's some documentary interest already on this book, to be honest. And the thing is, I know how to do it, but also I stole my own abilities to be able to tell a story cinematically. I made use of my youth. And that's what I tell anyone who wants to start. I've talked a lot about younger people starting, but look at me. I really reinvented myself at 50.
yeah, yeah. No, no, I can relate to that. I'm in my 40s and yeah, doing something different than what you.
Yeah,
Mm,
and you use everything, that all the skills that you have. I happen to be a really good people person. If you're shy, you need to think out of the box,
yeah,
do an archive driven piece, like that kind of a thing, you know. There's something you make use of your personality, make use of your past, and also try to make yourself, I mean, even doing a podcast, you meet interesting people, you can build your connections, start a zine if you're younger, do a Substack, invite people to guest edit. Like, how can you eat, no matter where you are in the world? Not everybody lives in New York City, right? Not everyone lives in London or LA. Wherever you are in the world, we live in a more digital era. You can invite people into your world like we're doing right now. We're
Yeah.
friends now, right?
Well, exactly, exactly, and I completely agree. Like this podcast has given me so much access to people, which back in the 90s when I was growing up as a teenager, I wouldn't have had this access because technology wasn't around. And just to try and find contact details for people like yourself and others, like from the night, it would have been nigh impossible to do. So I say in that world, so yeah, I do say that all the time. We do have the technology to branch out in particular and do that. Yeah.
And say yes, be a say yes person. Other, like, not, I mean, literally, again, please don't ask me for my New Yorker editor the second after I meet you. But other than that, like, I usually say yes, and be kind and nice to people and say yes and help people, and it comes back. I'm not woo woo at all, but I do kind of believe in good karma. Just be nice, right? Just be a nice person. And don't be bullied. Like, sometimes people take advantage of you. If you have a network of people, you can reach out to them for advice and say, how do I deal with this? It's not just about like getting yourself published. I mean, I have friends that look so happy on social media, and terrible things are happening behind the scenes. And they often will call me up or ping me and say, "Can I talk to you for half an hour? I don't even know how to navigate this mess." I mean, having a network doesn't just mean about getting ahead, it's about surviving in a very brutal world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to give a quick example of that and utilizing, when I wrote my first book, I had a publisher in mind, but but I'd never done a book proposal before, even though on a publisher's website it decided I didn't know how to do it. So I went through that publisher's catalogue, and there was one particular author had done autobiographies similar to me, and I reached out to him on social media and I said, "You don't know me, I'm just this person, but do you mind if you would be able to help me put this book proposal together for this particular publisher?" Got back to me the next day. Absolutely, we arranged a time and date. He called me on the phone because I'd emailed him what I'd written, what I thought was proposal, and he said, "Right, no, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to balance it out, and you need to think about this." And then so I did it, and then I sent it to him first. I said, "Yeah, that's perfect," and then sent it. And then literally, I think it was a couple of days later, the publisher got back to me and said, "Yeah, we want to take on your book." And then it went from there. So it does really help to build that network, take a chance, and like I said, be kind to
And
people.
also show up for them when they do something. Like, if somebody, I go to a lot of art openings. I have a lot of artist friends. When I'm thinking about writing a book about an artist next,
Mm,
and I'm building my network, but at the same time, a lot of artists don't know how to navigate press. They're visual spatial thinkers. I'll go to their show, their opening night. It means something. I take pictures. I put it on my Instagram. It doesn't hurt anyone. It just helps people, and they're so grateful. And sometimes you never know, like, one person that I wrote a very nice thing on an Instagram post, a couple photos, got a solo show, like,
no,
in a week, because another gallery director, and I'm not a gallery director, saw my post, follows me, and said, "Hey, who is this artist?" And that person has a show. So, like, you don't have to help them in big ways. Help people in little ways, reciprocate, and be, again, if you have a little privilege in this world, you know share it.
yeah, yeah, indeed, indeed, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And if you
mean,
don't, make, think of way again, like, just going to, say you have a favorite author or a favorite filmmaker, and you get a ticket to their lecture, right?
mhm,
Take a picture of them talking, tag them, put it on your social media, say, "This was a wonderful lecture. I highly recommend this, you know, fascinating topic." And I guarantee you that author might follow you back. Because that's the kind of people that, you want to follow back, right?
mhm, definitely, definitely.
And also, I will tell you, One of those people for me was Candace Millard, who you've had on the guest, who's one of my heroes.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just followed her on social media, and that's how I connected to her eventually. And she blurred my book.
Yeah, it's like that when I contacted her for the interview. She was just really nice. I said, "Yeah, I can do it," and we
Yeah,
got we
she's
got back
just
on track.
kind and she's
Yeah,
good. I mean, she's a lot of people want, I mean, a lot of people want a lot from the top tier of authors, right? Like
yeah,
the real, like the David Graham, the Candace Millard, and they're not going to do everything, and you can't take it personally, but they might do it in. I mean, I had one person um who blurbed my book who couldn't do it for the stowaway, but enjoyed the stowaway and did it for this book, right? So like, just don't write back a nasty email like, why wouldn't you do this? Like, let it go, be nice, keep sharing their stuff. People notice. I mean, that's the thing, people notice who's a little bit unhinged, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Very much so. Very much so.
I got a lot of letters after my New Yorker excerpt from
Okay.
people that are a little conspiracy theorists on Amelia Earhart and like explaining Amelia Earhart to me. I'm her biographer. I just spent 5 years in archives and tapes saying, I don't think you got this right. Da, da, da. And would you like to write a blurb from my book? I'm like, what? Like first of all, you're coming into my space, you're telling me something that is not true. And you're challenging me, and then you're asking me to help you out. That's what I mean about like unhinged,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like, yeah, and I don't even write back a negative letter. I just don't answer.
So on that note, then you talk about people written about conspiracy theories regarding Amelia Earhart. What's the weirdest conspiracy theories you've heard of her?
Oh, there's some great ones. One of them is that was a ding on my message. One of them was that she was the first facial change from the FBI, and she came back and she's housewife in New Jersey, and somebody wrote a book, and it was like, I mean, they have a lot of people have her as a spy in Japan, and that a lot of that comes from racism because in 1937 we were not at war, and then after world uh America was not at war. Not talking about the UK. In 1941 we had Pearl Harbor. America got into the war. A lot of men writing about Amelia Earhart were like connected to World War II. They hated Japanese people. So there was a fake movie, I'm not fake movie, a movie called Flight for Freedom, which Putnam knew that Amelia ran out of gas, but he was making money for his third wife. He was a womanizer and feeding them information. And that was about a woman spy that 1 million soldiers saw. So it's really hard to get past this generation of soldiers that took over the Amelia Earhart narrative from women. I don't see many conspiracy theorists with the women. It's always these guys that want to solve the mystery of Amelia Earhart. And sometimes the truth is really boring. Sometimes the truth is that she ran out of gas.
Very much, very much so. With Putnam, obviously she's died, Mia Earhart's died. What was he like after that? Because apparently he was a bit of a, I imagine he'd be a bit of a wreck if your wife's.
Yeah, he was like he had a girlfriend within weeks of Amelia Earhart's death, a stunt pilot. He thought she was exciting. I think he was mourning Amelia Earhart. I mean, it's hard to judge someone who's lost a partner. Like maybe they're getting comfort, but he needed money. He lost a lot of money on that flight as well because she's dead. She doesn't know, but he's broke. And he's looking for maybe, sexual companionship, but also financial gain. He drops his girlfriend when he starts love bombing this 20 something beautiful young woman who's from a banking company, a banking family in Beverly Hills. He thinks she's rich, but she's secretly broke, and she thinks he's rich, the millionaire publisher. So that's not going to work. They're both broke. That marriage ends. There's a fourth marriage. But what he does is things like fake his own kidnapping. I mean, he'll do anything I mean, like, this is not a scrupulous person, is what I'm trying to tell you. Um, again, the irony of this is that, he helped Amelia Earhart become famous, and without George Putnam, we wouldn't be talking today, you know?
Didn't he? Didn't he? I don't know if it's a conspiracy theorist or not, but didn't he consult mediums after Amelia died?
Yeah, and he didn't believe in it. Like he realized that there was a one. I get into that a little bit with my book, that there were a lot of charlatans, um, in the 30s that were preying on vulnerable people during the Great Depression. A lot of magicians were managing psychics. Um, a lot. There was a, a wonky science unit at Duke University that was monitoring ESP, which was run by people that are connected to the magicians. I mean, it's like, and psychic stuff enters the popular culture in 1930s, and it's all connected to charlatans. And he doesn't believe in it, but like he knows that there's an audience for it. So
Mm.
he actually places a couple of articles in psychic magazines, and he's like not even believing in it. I mean, wherever there was a buck, that you got to follow with George Palmer Putnam and with Amelia Earhart, you have to follow the money. And that's the story. Isn't that always the story though? To
Yeah,
follow the money, right?
yeah.
And
What
at the
kind of
same
money?
time, there is another true story, which is Amelia's really brave. She has her serious MO, two things. Women, she is a feminist. She wants women to achieve and even to fail the way men can fail. Like we don't talk about astronauts taking risks, they
Mm.
just take it. We don't judge them. The men particularly in the early days of the space program could die very easily, and they did. We don't judge them as being careless. She wanted women to be able to take the same risks, and also she wanted aviation to bloom, and she was always promoting aviation, to getting women. If women would go on planes, and the airlines could take off. If children could go on planes, the airlines would take off, and men would be allowed to fly planes by their wives, and she would let women come up on airplanes for free. And so when you get on an airplane today, it's pretty much because Amelia Earhart was promoting aviation as safe. She's like, the airlines took off because of Amelia Earhart's presence, and Lindbergh as well, before he got in with the Nazis.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah. I mean, well, we've talked a lot about the story of Amelia, and as I say, it's been very enjoyable, not just about your writing and stuff. I would highly recommend the book to anyone. From what I've read, what I've heard, sorry, it's about over 500 pages,
Yeah, it's a
which,
little bit over. Well, that's with the notes. It's really about 400 pages.
yeah.
But
So
it's written cinematically. It's
yeah,
so it's a story. I want to emphasize that it's got a beginning, middle, and end. So it's a story, and that I think reads a lot faster than like a 400-page biography.
yeah, indeed. Just quickly then, before we go, and by the way, I should say this at the beginning to everyone. If you're liking what you're hearing so far, please like, share, subscribe. I want the podcast to grow, so please do that. But before we go, what's next for you now? You briefly mentioned the book. I know you can't say any details about it, but do you have a date as to when you think it'll come out and whatnot?
Well, no, I think what I'm doing now is I'm on tour for Amelia Earhart. My life is going to be Amelia Earhart for the next year.
Mhm.
But I've been doing some, when I can, at free moments. I'm researching another person's life who I find really interesting, and I'm seeing if it's a book.
Okay.
I might drop it. Who knows? I think this is it. And that's one of the things that, like I'm interviewing a few people, I'm making a few trips, I'm looking at archives. On my downtime, I'm very, very lucky in my 50s. My life has changed with narrative nonfiction. I didn't have enough money on novels and docs to not work a full-time job. This is now my full-time job. I get paid to do what I love. That
Mm.
didn't come right away. It
Yeah,
came
yeah, yeah.
after but I'm able I so on my the days that I'm not working on Amelia Earhart right now on tour. Now promotion is part of the job. Um I have free time, and when I have free time, I'm able to interview other people or dip into archives of the project that I think I'm going to work on. And the next step is a proposal that I've put together. My agent loves it, what he's seen so far. And, we're not going to bombard my publisher right now when we're in the middle of this. Earhart, this is my publish. You're getting me my publishing week, which is pretty exciting. As I
Wow.
was saying to you right before the podcast, I just got a glowing reviews from the Washington Post, the LA Times, and the a Chicago Tribune. And I'm terrified right now because I have the New York Times is the big one coming out. And if it's a bad one, please don't email me, or I'll know. And Boston Globe. And it's a really panic-stricken time. It's a joyful time. But, one of the things about doing a creative project is getting it out in the world. And you're going to get judged and you can't take it personally. You do the best you can. And that's part of the job too, is that, you got to let go at a certain point. And in the future, you just start again. You do something else that really interests you.
Indeed, indeed. If people want to find out more about your work, where can they go?
LaurieGwenShapiro.com, and Laurie is spelled like Hugh Laurie,
Yeah.
Laurie. Gwen is spelled like Gwen Stefani, and then Shapiro is Shapiro.com. And I have an email which is on the website, which I often respond directly. Just don't give me any conspiracy theories, please. And I don't respond to those, but if it's other questions, I do respond to you.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's so enlightening, not just about your book, but about your career and your positivity with regards to where other writers can go on. So thank you so much for coming on to the
Oh, it's
286
lovely.
podcast.
I'm so glad I said yes. And I hope everyone listening will take that as a lesson and just say yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye, Chris. You're so sweet and
Thank you.
interesting, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.